At this point, almost everyone agrees on one thing. Emu is behind the Void Century. There is no real alternative. He controls what history people are allowed to remember and what history gets sent to the Shadow Realm, so it's not really a question of who did it anymore. It's how. And I think Oda's already left clues pointing to how Emu pulled off the Void Century and what that might actually have to do with things like devil fruits. When you look at how Oda actually writes about memory in the story, it doesn't behave like something that just disappeared. It's treated like something that lingers, something that can be passed down, almost like it has some kind of permanence to it. But the story's also been low-key telling us memory isn't permanent. It can be yanked out, it can be tweaked, or put on pause. Kuma can pull memories out of a person and turn them into something physical. Pudding can reach into someone's mind and edit their memories like a film. And Emu has already shown the ability to suppress or cloud someone's will and memories entirely, forcing them to act against themselves. But you can't actually delete it. Not for real. Even when it's suppressed temporarily, those memories can still come back. The person is still there underneath it. In Dressrosa, people weren't just forgotten by one person, they were removed from everyone's memory at the same time. And even then, physical traces like Kiros' statue still remained. Remember, Kiros was erased from everyone's memory, but his statue still remained, and people built an entire legend around it without understanding what they were actually looking at. The impact didn't go away, it just lost its context. And in a way, that's not different from the poneglyphs. The truth is still out there, preserved as something physical, even if most of the world no longer understands what it means. So past the question of whether the century of history was simply erased, it might make more sense to ask what actually happened to the world's memory of it. Because if that memory wasn't completely erased, then it didn't just vanish, it had to go somewhere else. It's like matter, it can neither be created or destroyed. So if the memory of that century didn't disappear, and it didn't stay the same, then whatever's left of it isn't gone. It's just something that we're not recognizing. And if something like that can change form instead of disappearing, then it opens the door to the idea that what we're looking at now might not just be history, but something that's been repurposed into something else. So when you add all that up, there is a clear pattern. Memory in the story doesn't really disappear, but an entire century's worth of history is somehow missing from the world, and it doesn't really feel like that's just a case of information being lost or destroyed in the usual way. So this is less about the specific period of time being simply erased, and more like that abstract record of time was changed into something else. And that's where I think devil fruits start to fit into this, because the story already tells us that they're the manifestations of people's dreams and desires. But it's not just that. We've also seen that this world already has a way of storing and passing on things like memory outside of a person. With Punk Records, Vegapunk created a system where knowledge and experience can't exist independently and be shared across multiple people. And even in chapter 1123, titled Void Fortnite, the message Vegapunk leaves behind for himself feels like a record designed to survive a gap in time, almost like a smaller version of what the poneglyphs are doing on a global scale. So the idea that something like memory or will could be preserved, stored, and carried forward beyond a single lifetime isn't just theoretical. The story has already shown us how that might work. And this wouldn't mean devil fruits only started appearing when that gap in history was created, because we already know fruits like the Nika devil fruit existed back then, seeing how Joy Boy had the devil fruit itself. If anything, it points to the idea that the mechanism for creating devil fruits was already in place long before those years went missing, and something about the creation of the Void Century changed how it works. But those desires don't really come from nowhere. In a story where things keep getting passed down and resurfacing, it's possible those desires are connected to something that existed long before the present. And if those desires are connected to something that existed long before the present, that there has to be some kind of place or structure in the world where something like that could exist or be carried forward. And that's where things like the Sunlight Tree Eve start to stand out. It's one of the only things in the story that already connects completely different parts of the world through its roots, like the Fishman Island and even the mangrove trees and the Sabaody archipelago. And this is also where a lot of the community starts to look at it differently, because there's always been the long-running idea that something like Sunlight Tree Eve could be tied to where devil fruits come from. And even if that hasn't been confirmed, it lines up just enough with what we've seen to make it worth thinking about here. And if something like that is even partially true, then it would need some kind of underlying structure to actually work on that scale. And when you look back at something like the Sunlight Tree Eve through that lens, it starts to feel less like a passive part in the environment and more like something that's actively moving energy across the world. So if something like the abyss portals that Emu is able to create are acting as a way to move things instantly across the world, it's not hard to imagine those connections extending outwards, linking different parts of the world back to a central point. And if that center is somewhere like Merijois, where Emu resides, possibly even tied to a place like the Room of Flowers, then it starts to feel less like a scattered phenomena and more like everything is being rooted back to one place. And when you look at how all those connections could be arranged, it's also interesting how closely that idea lines up with something like the world government symbol, which already represents a central point connected to different parts of the world. And if something like that is already moving energy across the world through the roots of the Eve tree, then it's worth considering whether it's only interacting with the environment or with the people connected to it as well. And we've seen smaller versions of that kind of structure on a character level. With Aramaki, his devil fruit literally turns him into a living ecosystem. He absorbs nutrients and life directly from his surroundings, and then he can use it to regenerate himself and grow entire forests, taking from one source and redistributing it somewhere else. It's not the same thing, but it follows the same basic idea of something being pulled and processed and then being expressed in a different form. And even in the way he sees the world lines up with that idea, where strength comes from taking and sustaining yourself off what's around you. And when you look at something like Punk Records, it almost feels like Oda wants us to imagine we're seeing a smaller precursor version of the Devil Fruit Tree. It's not just a library, it's a central source where memory, knowledge, and even personality can exist outside of a person and be shared across multiple bodies. Vegapunk satellites aren't really separate individuals in the usual sense. They're expressions of a single source, that being Vegapunk's brain, each one carrying a different part of the same mind. And as long as they stay connected to that source, the system works. Everything stays unified. Nothing is really lost. But if you take that idea and apply it on a larger scale, it starts to raise a different possibility, because if something like that ever existed for the entire world, if there was a central structure where things like will and memory and desire were meant to return to, like perhaps the Devil Fruit Tree, then what we're seeing now might not be how it was supposed to function. Because right now, Devil Fruits don't return to any kind of source anymore. They don't go back to a single origin. They just reappear somewhere else in the nearest fruit. It's almost like they're trying to survive instead of reconnect or sync like a Vegapunk satellite would. So instead of a unified mechanism for the Devil Fruits, what we might have been introduced to at the start of the story is something that's been cut off from the Devil Fruit Tree, where those abilities aren't part of something bigger anymore. They're just fragments, pieces of something that used to be connected, now scattered across the world. And in a world where things like hockey are tied directly to a person's will, it raises a bigger question about what would actually be moving through those system of roots. Because if hockey is essentially that inner drive made tangible, then every person is constantly generating something through their own existence, through their emotions, their bonds, and their desire to keep moving forward. In an old theory of mine, I compared that idea of souls to something like a miniature sun, something that keeps burning as long as a person's will is active. And when you look at it that way, memory isn't just something people carry. It's part of what shapes that fire, the soul, in the first place. It's what gives it direction, weight, and identity. So if something like the Sunlight Tree Eve can already carry light and energy across the world, then it's not big of a stretch to imagine it interacting with that same kind of energy as well. Not just moving light, but potentially drawing in and redistributing the imprint people leave behind through their lives. And if something like that is happening, even on a small level, then things like Devil Fruits might not just be random abilities. They could be shaped by whatever that system, like the roots of the Sunlight Tree Eve, could be collecting and producing over time, possibly even drawing from something that existed during the Void Century itself, like people's memories via their souls, the source of hockey. So if the Void Century wasn't something that simply disappeared and instead became part of something that's still active in the world today, then the past isn't just influencing the present, it's still being processed by it. And that underlying structure, being the Sunlight Tree Eve, is capable of collecting and redistributing things like will, memory, or even the imprint people leave behind, then things like Devil Fruits wouldn't be the only result of it, which starts to suggest that some of the most unexplained things in this world, especially the ones that affect people directly, might not be random at all, but symptoms of something still running in the background, like sapphire scales, which I talk about in the next video.